Hey everyone, we're going to get started. Thanks for everyone getting here, and just a few different announcements. I mentioned that we do have overflow in the council chambers, so if there's not seating here, we do have people outside, so if the room gets filled, they will point people over to the council chambers. And then can I get one of the interpreters up just to make the announcement?
Buenas noches. Si hay alguien que necesita escuchar este programa en el idioma de español, con mucho gusto le podemos interpretar. Tenemos el equipo aquí para que lo puedan sintonizar.
Thank you very much. So we are rolling live in this meeting in council chambers. As I mentioned last time, because we're not in the middle of a planning commission meeting, this meeting is being televised on channel 26, as well as live on the website and being tweeted out by our communications staff. Few little bit more logistics before we dive in. Three things. First, public comment. You're going to see that last on the agenda again. In the last meeting, I told you I was going to be moving that up. But once we ended the last meeting, both Dave and I heard from several of the community members in the audience that they liked it at the end. They wanted an opportunity to be able to speak on what was said in this meeting by you all, but also staff and the presenters. So because we have fairly robust agenda today where we're making some decisions and everything is a little bit meaty, I'm going to keep it at the end again so the community has an opportunity to comment on any one of these issues. And again, we can revisit that again later in future meetings depending on the agenda. We do have a lot on the agenda today. One thing that I want to make clear that it was my fault in the last meeting, we didn't do a very good job. As Dave and I facilitate tonight, really important for the people behind us, the people on TV, you know, the thousands that are watching tonight, that when we call on you, that you state your name and what organization you're from, so everyone knows who you are and who you're speaking for. So I'll do a better job of reminding you of all that tonight, but if you can kind of remember that as well, that'd be great. And then lastly, before we jump in, before we move forward, we do need approval of the meeting minutes from the last meeting. So if I can get a motion from someone. All in favor? Aye. Any dissent? Okay, great. So that takes care of logistics. I'm going to hand it over to Dave to walk through the presentation and find the clicker to give him so we don't stay on this slide the entire time.
It is a great slide. Thank you very much, Lee. Great to see you all again. Thank you again for being here. So the agenda for tonight's meeting is to review the summary notes as we did last time. We'll do that at the beginning of every meeting just to make sure that we got most of your feedback, or hopefully all your feedback from the last meeting, and kind of set the baseline for this meeting and other meetings coming up. We're going to have a presentation of the Brown Act and City Sunshine Ordinance from the city, so you all will get trained up on that here tonight, which I know you're all super excited about. We're also going to have members of Google here, and Joe in particular, to take us through the design principles and inspiration of Google right now, kind of what inspires them, just to kind of set a general baseline. We'll have a conversation about that as well. We're not going to be talking about anything specific project related, but just inspirations, design principles that will set that stage. We're also going to talk about existing conditions. We know that you all wanted a lot of information, and we've tried to get as much information to you. You saw that email come out. We're constantly gathering information, but we have a baseline to share with you, and we can talk generally about kind of what that information is telling us. We really want to get to the solution groups and have a discussion about the solution groups to really define what those topics are, so that we can then move in to start to schedule those solution group meetings and talk a little about the structure of those meetings and what we hope to get out of them. As Lee mentioned, we have the public comment, and then we'll talk about next steps and the meeting schedule coming up. So I also promise you that we'll always start with the group agreements. Just want to make sure that we all create a safe space, a space that we could all communicate freely, but then also respect each other and bring your opinions to the table freely. We printed them out and have them on the wall. They'll be at every meeting. I won't go through them all again. My favorite, again, is to have fun and make new friends. That's really what we're here to do. So please keep that in mind as we go forward. So with that, summary notes from SAG meeting number 1. We talked a lot about the process, what activities are going to be happening outside. of just the SOG meetings. We'll talk about it a little bit more today, but we want to just recognize that we talked about walking groups, pop-up workshops, where we actually go out to meetings where people are, citywide workshops, and obviously the solution groups being the big one. And in between, we're hoping to do surveys. So we talked a little bit about that. We talked about how we're going to synthesize the solution group meetings, and we'll talk about that again tonight. What the final report looks like, and that's definitely still evolving. What the city can provide in terms of community benefits, that'll be coming up in future and subsequent meetings as well. We also talked about the existing conditions information, a huge list here. You'll see a lot of it in tonight's discussion, but we're consistently gathering information. We'll be bringing more back to you as we go through this process. This is an example of some of what we heard. So I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on this upfront part, but just wanted to bring it back to you of the information that we gathered last time. Is there anything that we might have missed or any general input folks want to provide at this point before we move forward? All right. Excellent. With that, we're going to go ahead and move forward then. So I'm going to ask Ed to come up and give you, yes, you can sit up here, or you can, either way. Is that okay? So this is Ed. Clicker.
Good evening. My name is Ed Moran. I'm the Assistant City Attorney for the city. And I'm here to give you some general information about the Brown Act and some other regulations that apply to the city's boards and commissions. If any of you have been members of other city boards or commissions, this will just be a review for you.
Can you talk louder so everybody can hear you? Maybe a little bit more like you're a rock star, like into the microphone.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So again, as I said, I'm Ed Moran. I'm the Assistant City Attorney for San Jose, and I'm going to be providing you with some general information about the Brown Act and some other conflict of interest laws that apply to boards and commissions. As I said, some of this may be review for some of you, and it may be new information, but it's important that all our boards and commission members understand the Brown Act and some of the other rules that apply to legislative bodies. So we'll be talking, as the slide says, on commission meetings and conflicts of interest. So the Brown Act is a state law. It's a law that was imposed on local jurisdictions by the state legislature. It requires that all meetings of government bodies must be open to the public. The city's boards and commissions must deliberate and act in a public business openly. The exceptions to the rule are few and very narrowly construed. This allows the public to be informed and to participate in the decisions and the actions of the local government. The Brown Act applies to any legislative body, decision-making or advisory, and includes boards, commissions, and subcommittees. Thus, this means that this commission is subject to the Brown Act. The legislative body, the City Council, created this body, and the City Council decided that certain organizations would be represented on this board. And as a result of that decision, this particular body became a legislative body subject to the Brown Act. What is a meeting? That's the main issue in the Brown Act. And the definition of a meeting is a majority of board members present at the same time and place to hear, discuss, or deliberate government business. Whoops. Sorry about that. Okay. There it is. No action needs to be taken in order for it to be considered a meeting. A hearing, discussion, or deliberation triggers the Brown Act open meeting requirements. In the past, the legislation used to say when action is taken, That particular part of the code was changed to say, even if you're just listening, if a majority of you are together and you're listening to a particular action, then you're subject to the Brown Act. And there are some exceptions that I'll explain in a couple of slides. The following are not meetings. The majority of members may attend any social or ceremonial occasion, conference, community forums, and meetings of other government bodies as long as they do not discuss government business. Events not considered meetings are the following: conferences, training, workshops, community forums, meetings of other government bodies that you may sit on, social and ceremonial occasions. It will not be considered a meeting so long as a majority of members aren't talking together, taking part in the decision-making process for their commission. That basically means that all 38 of you could attend a meeting so long as a majority of you are not then separately discussing a particular action or matter that would come before this board. Under the Brown Act, there are prohibited meetings. A majority of members may not use telephones, landline or mobile, fax machines, emails, text messages, human intermediaries, or other means to develop a decision, each which involves less than majority of members, but which overall involve a contact among a majority of the members, though that would be strictly prohibited. A majority of members cannot use a cell phone, telephone, fax, email, or other devices to discuss, deliberate, or develop a consensus, agreement, or a decision. This discussion should occur at an agendized public meeting. Prohibited meetings include serial meetings. A serial meeting is a series of meetings to discuss, deliberate, or take action, each of which involves less than a majority of members, but which taken together involve a majority of commissioners. The following are not considered illegal meetings: attorney-client communications, one-way communications by staff to individual commissioners, or a communication from a commissioner to a staff member. This is one of the ones, these modes of communications are what causes a lot of legislative bodies to have problems, in that you have members of a commission or board or legislative body, in particular those bodies that are made up of 5, 7, or even in our council, 11 members. It's very easy for a couple of members of that legislative body to start talking about an item and not realize that then one of them will speak to another member. And before you know it, you've spoken to a majority of the members of the legislative body. Again, this body is large enough that that may not occur, but you need to be aware, because just because you don't speak to more than 1 or 2 people, you can't be certain that those 2 or 3 people haven't spoken to other members as well. Agenda items. Agendas must include the following requirements: a brief description of every item to be discussed. The description must be clear enough for the public to understand what is going to be discussed. Agendas for regular meetings must include a time for public comment. However, we recommend public comment time to be included in all agendas, even for special meetings. Again, as you heard from Lee, there is supposed to be a time for a public comment. That could be at the beginning, it could be at the end. But in addition to that, public members are allowed to make comments on any individual item separate from the general public comment. And it is important that your agendas describe what item is going to be discussed or taken action, so that the public can determine whether or not he or she wants to attend the meeting. It has to be specific enough so that he or she understands what the topic is about. The commission should not discuss items that are not posted on the posted agenda. Commissioners can comment on certain unagendized items as long as there is no discussion or action. You can briefly respond to a public comment. You can ask a question for clarification. You can refer an item to a staff for a future meeting. You can have a brief report by a commissioner on his or her activities. and you can have brief announcements. Those are the general exceptions to the prohibition on commission members not discussing any item that is not on the agenda. On the public comment, the public has a right to address the commission on both agenda and non-agenda items. The chair may limit the time for comment for each speaker if it's reasonable. I understand you don't have a chair, so it would be the facilitators. The chair or the facilitator has the power to maintain order at a meeting and to manage the commission's business under established rules of procedures to the extent that you have any. I don't believe this particular body has a rules of procedures or bylaws. And Robert's Rules of Orders may be used as a guidance for parliamentary procedure to the extent there's a question. This particular chart shows what the Brown Act requirements are for posting and notice. It also shows you that the city has an additional policy dealing with sunshine. Those are additional procedures that the City Council has imposed on the city itself, in addition to any Brown Act requirements. And the sunshine rules for posting and notices also apply to this particular body, although most other sunshine ordinances and regulations don't apply to this body. You should also understand that under the Brown Act, the state also imposes civil and criminal penalties if the Brown Act is violated. The commission may be civilly sued and may be liable for costs and attorney's fees. Violation of the Brown Act may also be a misdemeanor if a member participates in a commission action with the wrongful intent to deprive the public of any information. And that usually occurs when a member of the body is admonished that continuing to take particular action would be a violation of the Brown Act, and that particular member continues to take that action. In conclusion, as commission members, you're all representatives of the people in which have entrusted you to act on the legislative body's behalf to deal with the matters before you, and so as a result, the Brown Act is going to help the public have access to whatever information you have in coming up with your recommendations. I'm going to just generally mention that there is something called the Political Reform Act. It's generally called the FPPC. It's also a state law that imposes certain additional requirements to try to avoid conflicts of interest, members of legislative bodies. In general, that particular legislation doesn't apply to this body for two reasons. One, you're an advisory body, and so you're not a decision-making body, unlike the Planning Commission or the Appeals Hearing Board or other bodies of the city that do make decisions. And second, you were specifically chosen because you're a stakeholder. So it was clear that you did have some type of special interest that the council felt was important as a part of this body. And so the FPPC doesn't apply to this group unless you as an individual become under the city's rules would be considered a lobbyist, and then you would have lobbyist regulations that would apply to you that would also be part of the FPPC. The other policy that the city has that it imposes on its commissions and boards is Council Policy 0-4. That particular policy has consolidated several council policies that apply to boards and commissions. But it generally applies to boards and commissions that were created by the council under the charter or under the municipal code Title II. But you're neither one of those commissions, so generally City Policy 0-4 doesn't apply to this commission either. So my understanding is that there was a quiz at the end of this. So do you want to lead this quiz, this question, Kim?
Sure, why don't I give that to Kim? So I sent out an email to the group on Friday, and we talked about a meeting on April 19th.
So the planning department is hosting a meeting on the evening of April 19th, and it's a publicly noticed meeting. Anybody can come to discuss the new project, to look at the creating design guidelines for the downtown, including the Deardan Station area, and you're all invited. So what are the implications related to the Brown Act of this invitation that you've received and that members of the public have received? Can you go? Yes. Okay. Can all of you go? Yes. Can a majority of you go? Yes. Okay.
So what's the circumstance in which you would have violated the Brown Act to the extent that everyone believes they can go with?
When we caucus ahead of time.
You're not going to talk about it ahead of time?
We caucus ahead of time.
Good. Say that into the microphone, Dennis, you're right.
When you caucus ahead of time to see who's going to go, what are you going to say, what you're going to think about, how are you going to refute somebody, or how are you going to, eat all the good food?
That was beautiful. And what is your name and organization?
Oh, packed, John Pettigo.
That's correct, and there's also another situation that would occur at the meeting that could be a violation of the Brown Act.
So if this body, Ed, is 38 members, so I think the scenario you're talking about is if 20 members showed up to that meeting, correct?
No, the situation is you can have 20, you can have all 38 show up. The problem would be is if 20 of you, either at one point or collectively, had a discussion at the meeting about an item that would come before this board. So all of you can show up, a majority of you can show up, and that would not be a Brown Act violation. You wouldn't have to post it as a meeting of this particular group. But as was stated, if you meet before and you don't post a meeting notice that you're going to talk about who's going to go or what you're going to say at the meeting, or if you decide at the meeting that you all need to talk about something that you heard that you want to bring up at this meeting, and it hasn't been noticed, that would be a violation.
So I know that we haven't given you enough meetings yet to participate in. Who is interested in attending on April 19th to this meeting? Just show of hands. Okay, a good amount. I think that's helpful for us to know whether, how we post that.
Right.
Are there any questions for Ed? John?
Ed, John Pettigo, packed. Does that include posting something on Facebook?
The problem, well, what would you be posting on Facebook?
That I'm going to go, and boy, I just hope that X, Y, and Z gets talked about.
Right, that's one of the issues that's a problem because depending on how many Facebook friends you have and how often that particular posting is going to be sent or read by other members of this particular body, that could create a problem because again, if somebody then reads it and then sends it to somebody else and says, oh, by the way, did you know that so-and-so is going? Are you going? That's the problem with social media and the communication about an item that is a subject of this commission is you don't know who else is reading it and who else is communicating. And if at some point it's determined that a majority of members made a comment about what you said, and it was relevant to this particular body, there could be a problem.
Was it the part when he said he was going to post and gave a preference for what he hoped was dialogued about? Kind of the point, because he could go to the meeting and just check in on Facebook and say the facilitation was wonderful, I assume, correct?
Correct. And the question is, and that comment would never come before this board. So
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to be talking about that here. I agree. Okay, any other questions? We'll go here, your name and organization.
Edward Salm, Shasta-Hanchett Park Neighborhood Association. Would the tripping point be editorializing it, whereas if you just announce the existence of the meeting, for example, to your neighborhood association, would that in and of itself potentially be a problem?
Right. So announcing a meeting is not a problem. It's a question of what you get as a result of the announcement. Because you could get comments, and if you get comments from your constituents, that's not the issue. The issue is whether you get comments from other members of this particular body. The, yeah, it's a problem, again, as I said, because generally you may have no intention of it going beyond one particular area, but unfortunately, we have seen circumstances in which that particular comment was then sent and other members of a legislative body heard about it, made comments. And again, as I said, it's not a question of getting a consensus. It's a question of hearing and discussing a particular item that would come before this body.
Okay, we have Harvey, and then we'll go to Stephen.
Harvey Darnell, the North Willow Glen Neighborhood Association. So I'm going to the 19th meeting, and am I allowed to speak as a member of the public on a particular issue, particularly if, let's say, all the people who come from this group speak on parks and open space, for example?
Sure.
And the necessity for it.
Right, as an individual member, you can say whatever you want to say at the meeting.
Okay.
I assume there is no one here that's going to be representing this particular group.
No, I would not.
And so as many members who attend that meeting who want to speak can speak.
Okay, thank you.
Stephen McMahon with the San Jose Unified School District. I want to be clear on the train so I get the answer to the quiz correct. It's okay for all of us to attend because you are noticing it publicly. If the city wasn't noticing it and the majority of us came and it was specifically discussing something that's under this group's purview, we should not be attending.
Correct. Because the meeting you're attending is already publicly noticed for that particular body, it's a public meeting that you're attending, so any comment you make will be able to be considered by the public. If it was a private meeting and it wasn't a public body and it wasn't noticed, then you would have to notice this particular body's attendance at that private meeting.
But even in this case, you're noticing this one as a special meeting of this group?
You don't have to notice this particular meeting as a special meeting if you're simply showing up to discuss the agenda items on that public body's meeting.
And that's what I want to clarify. If that agenda item is the topic of this group, this group should agendize the meeting.
You still don't have to agendize it unless this body is going to be meeting at that meeting to discuss the item as a body.
Pretty clear.
Well, not to get overly technical, but if you go back to your slide earlier, it's here, discuss, deliberate, or take action. If a majority of us are hearing the very topic we're charged to oversee, it should get agendized
Right,
from
but
this
it's an
group.
exception to that particular requirement. If the other meeting you're attending is a publicly noticed meeting, you can hear, but if you are taking action or discussing that part of it, and a majority of you are meeting, that part of it has to be noticed. But if you're simply attending another publicly noticed meeting, you can sit and listen, you can comment on it, so long as you're not acting or in a manner where a majority of this body is deliberating at that meeting. That's the exception to the general prohibition.
Thank you. I'm going to move us along two things. First, this is a good kind of high-level training on what the Brown Act is. Dave and I as facilitators, Lauren Haley and I, as staff, are going to be very practical in the future about how this applies. And when we're running into a situation, we're going to talk a little bit about how the Brown Act is going to affect the solution groups we talked about. So we're going to bring this down a level so that we're very clear with you all about when this is going to be an issue and how we're going to remedy that as a group. Okay? Just before we do the sorry, Ed.
Yeah, I just have also one more comment. Many of you represent organizations, and the fact that you represent an organization doesn't limit your organization's ability to continue its efforts at meeting with council members, meeting with the city manager, separate and apart from the fact that you represent that organization in this group. There is, though, a limitation as to whether any member of this particular group can lobby the city council or the staff with regard to any particular matter that comes before this board. So just want to make sure that there's a distinction with regard to a member of this board not lobbying on behalf of your organization, which is separate from any other member of your or officer of your organization doing that with the council or city staff.
Okay, thank you. Really quickly, because we have a bunch of people standing and on the floor, we do have about a dozen or 2 dozen people in council chambers watching this live. They're filling out cards, so they have the ability to speak during public comment. If any of you would like to be more comfortable, so be it. You're perfectly welcome where you're at, but if you would like to actually have a seat and watch this, council chambers is right down the hall. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Flynn from Google for the next topic.
Thank you. Michael Flynn with Google. I'm here with 2 colleagues. They're joining me today to talk through some of our early ideas around place. And to sort of kick us off, I'd like to introduce Mark Golan, VP Real Estate for Google.
All right, make sure we get the mic close enough here. Well, good evening. Clicker here. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking the City of San Jose and this body for allowing us the time to present on this very important project. The purpose of our presentation is to share our vision and our principles for creating place. This is the beginning of a long journey, and we're very excited to start this process with you tonight. We have 3 members of our team here for the presentation. You've already heard I'm Mark Golan, Vice President of Real Estate and Development for Google. I have a substantial involvement with the City of San Jose, both professionally and personally. Professionally, I was Global Head of Real Estate at Cisco, which is the city's largest private employer, and frequently engaged with the city in that capacity. And personally, I was a 13-year resident of the City of San Jose. We also have Javier Gonzalez, Government Affairs and Public Policy Manager for Google. Javier was born in San Jose and raised downtown in the Guadalupe, Washington neighborhood area near Virginia Ave and Palm Street. He attended local schools and worked as a policy and community affairs aide to several state and local policymakers. Javier and I will be available during the Q&A session of this presentation. Finally, we have Joe Van Belgen, Senior Director of Development for Google. Joe will be giving the presentation today. Joe is a relatively recent addition to Google, and we are excited to have him join our team. It's rare that you find a senior leader that's a natural fit with your beliefs, values, and approaches. He's passionate about the triple bottom line, an idea that believes a project only succeeds if it meets its environmental, social, and economic objectives. Joe is a co-owner and founder of Windmill Development and was also a senior developer at Lendlease, one of the foremost developers of large mixed-use projects in the world. He was one of the leaders in the green building movement, where he was a founder of the Canadian Green Building Council and served as a director of the U.S. Green Building Council. The Green Building Council is one of the fastest growing nonprofits in the world and developed a LEED rating system, which has become the standard for green buildings worldwide. Joe's development milestones include the first LEED Gold building in Canada and the first LEED Platinum market residential building built in the world. His impact was so great that he received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Canadian Green Building Council for exceptional leadership in 2010. In addition to his numerous accomplishments in the green building space, Joe worked on large-scale mixed-use projects, such as Barangaroo in Sydney and Elephant Castle in London, where he developed a reputation as an innovator in areas such as job training, community engagement, district utility systems, and use of innovative building techniques. You'll hear more about this during his presentation. Before I hand things off to Joe, I just wanted to state how important the partnership approach is going to be to this project. We believe that working with the community and the city to collectively find win-win solutions to our challenges yields the best results. We're here to listen, and we look forward to engaging with you all in this manner. Thank you. Joe.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for having me here today. As Mark has said, I'm very passionate about developments that are socially and ecologically and economically responsible, and I've dedicated my last 20 years to that. But for the first 10 years of my career, sadly, I didn't really focus on those areas. And when I look back for the reason why is when I went to university and trained as a businessman, you kind of got this impression that being good to society and the environment was a cost to business. So when I left university, I didn't really focus on these areas. But about 20 years ago, through some soul searching, I read a book called Natural Capitalism by Paul Hawkins, and it forever changed the way I think. And using many of those principles in that book and applying them into my development projects, I quickly realized that being good to society and the environment was good for business, and you could do well from doing good. And there's three key things that I learned over the years from these large mixed-use developments is you need really talented people, but those talented people need to be passionate about the community and the environment and economics. And you need to have a really good culture as an organization, so of that culture of trying to do well from doing good. And the third thing is you have to have this mindset of innovation. And I don't necessarily mean just innovation from technology or innovation from specific techniques in a building. It's a mindset of how you approach solutions to come up with better through innovation. So when I got the call from Google to join, I mean, how could I say no? I know. Can you hear me? Hello? The battery died.
Hello?
Is that better? Great. So when I got the call from Google, I couldn't say no because I've known their people for many years, and they're obviously very passionate and talented. Google has obviously the right culture and this mindset of innovation. But what I didn't really know much about was San Jose. And so I moved downtown and spent 3 months there trying to understand what was going on. And what I saw was really special. I could see plays happening. I could see how hard the city was working to activate their spaces. I could see young people downtown, and I could see these new shops and retail starting to happen. I got so excited I now moved to San Jose. Oh, slide. There we go. And so you're going to hear me talk a lot about place. And place just isn't about buildings. So it's not just about creating office buildings or residential buildings or community facilities. It's about those urban experiences that people crave. It's about the programming of those experiences and the creation of community, so you create these places of community. So we started to think about how do we create these principles of place to help guide us together with the community in creating places that will enable the local community and Google to thrive together. So when focusing on place, there's 4 key focus areas: community, nature, innovation, and economics. So from a community perspective, places are about people and the connections between them. Nature, the well-being of people depends on the health of the planet. Innovation, you have to have a healthy disregard for the impossible. And economics, we need to invest in bold ideas that create replicable future, solutions for the future. And when I mean economics, I don't mean just the project being economically viable and replicable economic solutions. I mean about also focusing on the economic well-being of a community. And it's important that, that a successful placemaker requires balancing all these 4 areas in an integrated fashion. So when you approach place, you approach making sure that it is a balance between community, nature, innovation, and economics. But then when you look at individual strategies, say within nature, you also want to approach it saying, if I do something good for nature, how does that benefit the community? How do I use innovation, and how do I use economics? So I'm now going to go through some real examples to hopefully illustrate these principles. And these are examples from projects that I led when I was at an owner of Windmill Development several years ago, and some recent examples with Lend-Lease Development. And I want to make sure everyone's clear that these were very specific and contextual to those communities, so they're not necessarily something that's applicable to San Jose. So we need to work together through the community engagement process to really understand what are the right solutions for the community. So let's start with community. So the top 3 slides in the bottom 2 left are from a windmill project, and the bottom right is from a Lend-Lease project. So there's 4 key things in here that I want to talk about. The first thing is mixed use is very important to create vibrancy. You know, so to having a mixture of office, residential, retail, and community facilities. The second thing is the ground plane is super important. Now, many people don't necessarily like height, and I don't blame them, because sometimes you look at these architectural wonders that architects have come up with, but they've forgotten about the ground plane. They've forgotten about the people, and that's where life happens. So place happens at the ground plane. So it's really important to make that first 40 feet count. The third thing is, through the community engagement process, it's really important to listen to the community to really understand the experiences that they want. So to give you an example, in this particular project, the local community wanted us to focus on local retailers, you know, so that when they went and got their loaf of bread, they knew the baker. So we found this really great baker who wanted to move on the site. He made great organic breads, tasted fantastic. But we couldn't get him into our building soon enough because they weren't built. So we built him a temporary facility on site because we really wanted this baker. And then he moved into his new space, and he used reclaimed bricks and reclaimed wood to create his facility, supporting the environmental aspects. The fourth thing is what I call this activating place early. One of the issues with these large-scale projects is it takes time to entitle, and it takes time to build. So it's important to activate the community earlier. So in this project, Elephant Park, the team went out and bought a bunch of old shipping containers, repurposed them, and put 38 local creative groups and nonprofits in those in the containers. It was called an Arts Work project. And they used that place to start activating community early through a series of events. Now, when you look at those principles of place, that's about community, but there were some other things that went into that thinking. From an innovation, the affordable housing that was put in this project, because affordable housing is key to a mixed-use neighborhood. We came up with an innovative solution with the city to allow for home ownership for affordable housing units. Now, from an economic perspective, that Artworks project employed 150 people right off the bat, but it became this incubator center for businesses to grow that would move into the retail on site. And then from a nature perspective, you'll see that the project expressed nature in the design. So nature. Now, there's 2 components to nature. Nature is about connecting people to nature and promoting urban biodiversity. But there's another component, is respecting nature and using its resources wisely. So using less energy, using less water, using the materials wisely, and things like making sure you're addressing climate change resilience. So the top project, again, is a windmill project that had a series of green roofs that attracted butterflies and vegetable roofs. The lower buildings are Lend-Lease projects, and they use the same very much principles as at Windmill. Is you, first of all, you focus on ensuring you achieve the highest rated buildings, so you use less energy and water. You employ renewable energies on strategies. But these projects also went deeper. So for instance, in the Barangaroo project, which is about the size of opportunity, say, of Dearborn Station, there's a big central harbor heat rejection plant. And what that means is they use the ocean for heating and cooling the buildings, which saved millions of liters of water because there was no cooling towers. Then what the project did is it measured how much remaining carbon was there from the buildings, from transport and waste, and they created a carbon fund. So the residents and the the office buildings on site contributed into a community carbon fund, which was then used to create new off-site renewable energy, or go into a school and replace an old gas boiler and put, say, solar hot water on it. Then the project also wanted to be water positive, so it put in a large sewage treatment plant in the development that produced recycled water for flushing toilets and irrigation. And then it was designed to use boreal sewage from the city sewage line to produce more treated water. So then it could export treated water off-site and therefore produce more water than what it was using on site. And likewise in Elephant and Castle, it's a central plant under construction now to produce heat and electricity, and also able to export off-site to get to carbon neutrality. Now from an innovation perspective, when you look at those principles, those weren't easy things to do. The regulations had to be changed. You had to work with utility regulators to allow that to be owned by the project and the developer. from a community perspective, that vegetable grove, that created community. I mean, it was fun to watch the kids take their buckets to the roof and harvest their carrots. And from no, that's my only point on that. Sorry. And then from an innovation perspective, you know, one of the things with innovations, you really need to look at challenging the traditional approaches to development that don't think about place first. Now, let me give you an example. When it rains and hits our buildings, you know, we put the water in pipes and we try to get it off-site somewhere and store it and then get treated, and it goes in another pipe, and quite frankly, I don't know where it often goes. But it's a very expensive thing to do, and it adds no value at all to place. So I came up with this idea on this one project to create our own creek. So this is a man-made creek. And so when it rains, the water hits the buildings, flows directly into this creek and these ponds, and the water rises and falls and stores it, and the plants treat the water. On the right side of the creek were these residential units where the decks floated over the ponds, and on the left side of the creek was a public pathway where the public could move through the site. Now, again, using those other principles, from an economic perspective, those ground floor units sold for a really good price that helped pay for the ponds. But the other thing that happened is because we didn't use municipal storm systems, the municipality didn't charge us for the stormwater hookup fees. So again, that saved us money to allow us to invest into more place. And from a community perspective, one thing I strongly believe in is that our kids are losing their connection to nature because we're urbanizing. And what was fun in this project, you could see there was children dip their nets in and try to catch the native fish that we put in this creek. And then from a nature perspective, a lot of magic happened on this site. You know, we picked trees and plants that were native and fruit-bearing and nut-bearing, and birds came. But over about 10 to 12 ducks got born on this site every year. And then in the summer, algae grew, and so we put these crayfish in there, thousands of crayfish, to try to control the algae, and then this otter came in and ate them all. And, and then we had to go in and put flat rocks, you know, for the crayfish to hide. And it was fun trying to play Mother Nature, but the reality is what this did is it really connected the community back to nature, and they really took stewardship and ownership over that creek. Economics. So I want to reinforce this point because economics, obviously the projects have to be economically viable and you need to create replicable economic solutions. But again, it's about the economic well-being of the community. Now please bear with me in this example because it's not obvious of how this created an economic benefit as I walk through this. So one of the things I'm a very big believer is engaging the community. They know place better than any developer can, and they make place stronger when you really listen to them. So we engaged with the Indigenous people of Canada, which we call First Nations people, in case I referred to that. And one of the things in our engagement process, they asked us to do 4 things: respect nature, respect their culture, express their culture, and because they were an economically disadvantaged group, they asked us to find jobs and create jobs in the construction industry for them. So we went about, from a community perspective, we gave our pledge to their children to do those things. They blessed the land, and then they came to all our community events and expressed their culture in those events. We expressed art on site, such as totem poles, to honor their culture. And then we implemented the job training program. Now, from an innovation perspective, that program, when it initially started, didn't work so well, as many others hadn't. But from an innovation perspective, what we did is we went to the contractor and the Indigenous people, and we came up with the concept of hiring Indigenous job coaches. So that now that the Indigenous people were working on site, they had someone to go to understand, that understood their culture and helping them move through the system. And then we went to the local educational institutions who offered to provide English and math training so that they could move up the ladder and become apprentices. Obviously, from a nature, we incorporated many of the ideas of the First Nation people as well. Now, from an economic perspective, we were building in a time, as you've probably seen some of these earlier, very innovative projects that hadn't been done before. And We were building in a time when construction costs were rising very rapidly. It was around the time the Olympics were being built. And everybody was busy, so that it was hard to get that drywaller to show up, and it was really hard to get the electrician and the mechanical because they were all busy. And so developers were really struggling. They were struggling to meet their budgets, and they couldn't be built on time. In fact, some of the developers couldn't build the projects for what they sold for, even though it was a hot market. And so one of the things that really happened to us is that when we started that indigenous programs, it was really for carpentry. And what we quickly realized in that program is we thought what we were doing was trying to help the indigenous people. What we actually found out is they made us better. As we started to understand their culture, it changed the way we think, and it started to impact our contractor on site. And the next thing that happened was the electrical and the mechanical trades signed up to the program, so even more people got trained. And then this program spilled out into other parts of British Columbia, and other people continued to get trained. We then went into the local schools, and we asked the schools in Earth Day to provide us posters about what they thought of the project and what else we could do. I wasn't there this day, but these indigenous kids presented that poster to the public and to our construction workers on site. And as the story goes, they read this poem about how much they respected the fact that we were looking after their culture but creating economic opportunity for their people. And it was interesting to see these young construction workers in tool belts with tears in their eyes. And so, yes, this improved the economic well-being of the community for these people, but it did something for us. What happened was we were one of the few projects that were delivered this project on budget and on time, and that's because people showed up. And I fundamentally believe the reason is they saw the value that was happening to the community, and they just did not want us to fail. And so these programs often have, you go into these programs and you often don't understand what the economic benefit that is going to happen. Now, Lend-Lease is also a leader globally in these training programs. To give you an example, in Australia, the Australian government contributed several $1 million to a skills training program at Barangaroo that resulted in an over 80% success rate from an apprentice. And they, too, worked with their economically disadvantaged indigenous culture to provide training. In Elephant and Castle in London, there's a program called Be On Site that Lend-Lease developed several years ago, and that's really targeted to bringing in new people into the construction trades. It's been so successful, they hire about, on average, one person a week since 2007. 90% of the people stuck on site. 21% of the workforce are women, which was great because they wanted to bring more women into the construction trade. And they also worked with the economically disadvantaged, creating about 24% for individuals that have been previously incarcerated. So everyone in this room is like, every SAG's viewpoint is very important, as is the community's viewpoint. But place requires balance, and we need to maximize the whole. And what I mean by that is, we all have singular issues, which is really great to have. But if we get too focused on, say, nature and not really focus on community innovation and economics, we won't create a balanced outcome. So it's really important that we find that right balance of these principles in a way that allows the community and Google to thrive together. And the city of San Jose is facing, many of the same issues cities are facing around the world. They're facing the same kind of social, environmental, and economic pressures, whether that's affordable housing, transportation, displacement, lack of open spaces, climate change, the list goes on and on. And, we as a community, we as Google and we as individuals feel that pressures. The well-being of a community is affected when, those that work in our shops, build our buildings, teach our kids, protect us, can't live in the communities that they work. And I realize that Google can't solve all those problems, but we really fundamentally believe that we can be part of the solution by working with the community. And we also believe for us to thrive, the community also has to thrive together. And The other thing I think what's really I want to reinforce is those previous examples were very specific and contextual to those other projects. So we now have an opportunity through this community engagement is really to find the right solutions to San Jose. And I think it's really important that for Deer Dawn that we integrate into the local community and the downtown to make all three stronger and to feel this momentum together. And let's face it, the existing reality isn't working. It's time to change a new reality. And I believe that new reality will find these new innovative solutions working together that other developers and other communities in the valley will be able to use, and where other people from around the world will look for inspiration. And I believe we can create a reality where everyone in this room, the broader community, and everyone that's lived in past San Jose will feel like they belong. And I really believe we can create a reality where this project integrates with the neighborhoods associations and the broader downtown to feel this momentum moving forward. And the last slide is we started to think about what are those important areas that we need to focus on. And within these areas, what we're really looking for feedback from SAG and the broader community is what are the strategies that we can kind of do to start to fill this out so that we can look at a balanced approach to the creation of this opportunity. And lastly, I want to just reinforce that I really do believe that by working together, the community can thrive. And I really believe that we can create solutions here that allow Google to create the kind of workplaces and services that allowed us to create the culture that allowed us to grow. And we can really do well from doing good. So thank you. I'd like to now open it up for some feedback and some questions.
Thank you very much, Joe. That was great. As Joe mentioned, no one knows the community better than the community. That's why we're here. Oh, sorry, I'll step forward here. So we wanted to ask you all some general questions. We have Joe and Mark here to help answer some questions. You see on the board, we want to get your general responses to the presentation. We want to hear what some of your concepts and ideas might be that Google should be thinking about. You have folks here representing Google that are listening to your ideas, will be absorbing this information and taking it back with them. And the last question is, what other areas or places could the Deer Dawn area draw inspiration from and why? As Joe just presented his inspirations, we're going to ask you all to think about that as well. And we don't necessarily need to get through all of these questions here today. That last question really is to queue up what we're going to be talking about at the next SOG meeting, where we're going to do those, what we talked about, 3 to 4 to 5 minute TED Talks, where you're each going to get an opportunity to actually present and give your inspirations and view of what concepts you draw inspiration from that you can see in the Deer Dawn area. So with that, what are your general responses? I know it's a very general question, but if you can flip your name tags vertical, we can get started. I'm sure you all have some questions, responses. Yes, Norma, if you could let us know your name and organization.
Yes, that's Norma Camacho, Santa Clara Valley Water District. And I think that the direction that is being taken here is one that's very promising to myself. Being in the water supply, flood protection, environmental stewardship arena, I understand how one has to balance all those three issues when you're trying to develop a project for the community. And it's a very difficult balancing act to do. But I'm glad that Google is taking that approach and is going to take this challenge on. You had talked about culture and respecting culture, and I guess I wonder how you determine, there are so many cultures here in this area, which culture is the predominant culture, or do you meld the cultures together? How do you do that in terms of addressing culture?
You know, the example I gave, Elephant Castle, is a classic example. There's many cultures there. You have to respect all the cultures, and you have to find a way to really listen to each of them to, again, understand the experiences they want. Because diverse experience and diversity makes a community stronger, and so you have to spend a lot of time understanding that.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure also that it's stated here that nature is going to be respected, and you try to work within your constraints within the environment and not to cause harm, but to cause, like, say, net benefit positive, which is a good thing. But I hope that also goes on the human side of things, too. I would hate to see people displaced and moved to create issues elsewhere within, the county or within the city as well, too.
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you very much, Norma. And just, I forgot to mention that Lauren here is writing down all the input that we're getting here. If we don't answer all the questions, we're going to be fielding them here today, and we could always come back with responses. So, Teresa, you're up.
Teresa Alvarado with Spur. Thank you very much. Just my reaction was that you were very genuine and very open in your approach, and I think Google, their participation on this committee really represents that as well, and I appreciate that. I think the scale of the work that you referenced is really important, because we can't compare this to anything else we've ever built. It's not a piecemeal solution. It's not talking about infrastructure separate from cultural communities, separate from economic development, separate from environmental stewardship or anything else. We're talking about a scale of a district that really requires someone who understands all those intersections. So I really appreciated you talking about things in that scale. I also thought it was really, really important to talk about this being a people-first project and people-first approach. San Jose has so much talent, and we've had individuals who reflect incredible creativity, incredible innovation over, throughout history in San Jose. But for many, many years, they've been isolated and on their own, and so we don't see them a lot. In fact, many of them, I think, have given up hope on San Jose. I think what's really important is to tap into that. They do still exist here, and I want them to be lifted up through this process and be provided with an outlet to share their creativity and our cultural, many cultural experiences. Just finally, a couple more things. Urban design, extremely important. I would love to see something that is unique to not only San Jose, but unique in the world. The kind of closed systems that you're talking about from an environmental resource, natural resource standpoint is different than what we are accustomed to here. And I think it's critical with periods of drought and flood and climate change, of course. I think that's really critical. And so environmental stewardship as well. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Jeffrey, I believe you're next.
Hi, Jeffrey Buchanan with Working Partnerships. Thank you for the presentation. Two questions. One, it was helpful to see the different kind of overlays that you're looking at in your planning process. What do you think for this particular project, given the amount of kind of public supports that are surrounding it, the investments in the transit infrastructure, the kinds of upzoning the project will take, some of the other ways in which the public land that's vital to making this project work, does that change any of your planning decisions, just that the amount of kind of public support that's a part of this project? And then lastly, I appreciated the look at how these different areas overlap, and I think for me the thing that perhaps is most concerning is the issue of displacement really has economic, social, and environmental impacts. And if we look at the growth of Google in Mountain View, for example, when you look at data from MTC about every new job added in Mountain View, and today I think Google represents about 1 in every 5 jobs, each new worker is on the road for about an additional 40 minutes compared to existing workers in Mountain View. And so it's actually, you're seeing the most environmental impact from the job growth, and combine that with what we're seeing in terms of displacement from workers who live in Mountain View or San Jose and are getting pushed out to the Central Valley. And some of those workers even are working at tech companies, working as janitorial, working as security officers, working in the cafeterias. All those other ways beyond like whether or not a building is LEED certified, we're seeing all these other impacts when it comes to displacement and gentrification as tech continues to grow. How as a company are you starting to think about those issues?
So, I guess I'll start with your second question first. Obviously, as Joe mentioned, the issues of housing and transportation in particular are huge, and they spill over into the concepts of displacement. Obviously, if you can't live near where you work, all right, that starts to change the nature of the community and obviously has a big effect on those individuals. To start with this project, one of the reasons we were obviously attracted to it was the concept of Diridon Station, that we see what's going on. We see the problems that exist when workplaces are built away from areas where people can commute through public transportation or away from areas where they can live. And our hope here in working with this group, the community and the city, is that we can create a live-work environment in this area across the multiple stratas of the economic groups that will allow people to live nearby. But just as importantly, by having Diridon Station there, and when it's completed, by having BART, by having Caltrain, by having high-speed rail, by having all of these modes of transportation available, that there becomes a very convenient way of getting to the place that allows people a much better quality of life in terms of reducing their commute. So there's no easy answer to the things that you pose. I think this really gets back down to good urban design, right, and how we envision what's going to be built out here over time.
Thank you, Jeffrey and Mark. Harvey, you're next, then we'll come to you, Maria.
Harvey Darnell, North Willow Glen Neighborhood Association. I spent 40 years of my life as a nurse, so I tend to look at things holistically. And I really appreciated the fact that what you showed us that you've worked on so far has been holistic. I'm not only someone who is wants to see people live in a good way, but I want to make sure that we have proper stewardship of the earth, that I was on a national panel for Kaiser. I set policy, and one of the things that I had to make sure that we did is that we created the best outcomes for our patients, yet kept Kaiser afloat, that we didn't somehow bankrupt the organization. So I understand that, and I appreciate your principles that you're looking at. I was very excited to see a couple things. I'm an environmentalist, have been an environmentalist before there was a lot of people running around doing it. And I was excited to see that you created a stream through the middle of that project. Because one of the things that I had asked at the first meeting was one of the areas that I'm interested in is somehow unroofing Los Gatos Creek that is underground through a project that was done about 60 years ago. And it'll be right through the middle of your project. The second thing is the regenerative kinds of agriculture, et cetera, that you talked about. And I'm very interested in seeing how we can create some urban agriculture within the project or adjacent to the project. So in the whole, I find your development very exciting. And then as a member of the Envision 2040 general plan, I was a very strong proponent of complete urban neighborhoods. And this sounds like something that you have in the, as one of your principles.
Great, thank you very much, Harvey. I'm glad to see that you're already kind of pulling some of those inspirations that you might have from what Joe presented, because that'll kind of feed into that next discussion we have the next meeting. Maria.
Maria Noel Fernandez with Silicon Valley Rising. And just say I appreciate the principles that were shared, and I would love to hear more. Like, I want to hear more about what do, we know that there's more land that's been purchased and things are moving forward rapidly as we read in the business journal and the media. How could we learn more about your actual plans for this site so that we could have a robust conversation and really add to, what we too envision?
Obviously, things are moving forward at this stage, but this is going to take a while. And I think there's a perception that there's this grand master plan that we've already worked out or thought through, and somehow we're not, sharing with the community at large. And frankly, this is the beginning of the process, for us to get the site together just by itself is obviously very complicated. It's not completed yet, by the way. That's taken quite a while. And part of the process of engagement really had to wait until there was a site, honestly, to discuss. But now that we're getting close, right, to having a site that's viable, it was time really to start this engagement process to really get into the detail. We really want to hear the feedback from the community before we design a plan. And it doesn't mean we can't think of conceptual ideas, and we've done a little bit of that already, where we've had some very high-level conceptual designs which we've run by folks just to get reactions and start getting some feedback. But there's nothing that's been done yet in any detail because, frankly, we need to hear from the community first. It'd be presumptive to start that process until we know what the community's going to be interested in.
Great. Thank you, Maria and Mark. Bill, you're next.
Hi, good evening. I'm Bill Souders. I represent part of the San Jose Downtown Residents Association. So first of all, I enjoyed the presentation. Thank you. And one of the things I liked was your notion about early activation. And if we look at 5 years or 7 years from now, very early activation could be something that I think all of us need to be thinking about. I'm going to jump to the third question. Which areas should we learn more from with you? One would be Toronto Quayside, because that's one of the places where you seem to be really innovating. And to Teresa's point, scale changes everything. So you may not be able to answer it now, but I would love to hear more as we go through this, how your design is shifting around innovation as it relates to scale. And then the third topic, what concepts or ideas should you be thinking about? And I'm sure you are. The antithesis of Diridon would be what happened in Cupertino. And I know you're not thinking about it that way. But the very unfortunate events in the last couple of weeks changed the calculus a little bit. So one of the things that I'm hoping for is that we don't have a citadel sitting in the middle of our neighborhood. I came out of high tech. I'd badge into buildings. I'd badge into floors. I'd badge into rooms, so I get the security thing. But I think that's going to be a very, very important design decision. I hope that you can err on the side of openness rather than closedness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I look forward to seeing that project from Toronto when you do your TED Talk next week. Leslie.
Leslie Hamilton, Guadalupe River Park Conservancy. I'll add my thank yous. I'm curious about what was it about living in downtown for 3 months that excited you, and what specifically about this area? Also interested, about affordable housing, and glad to know that you consider that successful for any mixed-use development. Can you talk about phasing? I mean, you've assembled an amazing amount of property, but can you talk about how you see the project coming online?
Yeah, maybe I'll do the first part and you can do the second part. I mean, I think, when I came and spent time downtown, it was some of the things I pointed to is I really liked the way the city was really trying to activate in the park. Like almost every weekend there was something going on in Cesar Chavez Park, and we'd go hang around there. But what I started to see was these interesting sort of restaurants and stuff popping up, and there was a lot of kids and young people coming downtown, and that's a good sign when you start to see that there's that migration in there. I also spent, I'm an avid fly fisherman, so I love creeks and rivers, and I spent some time driving down my bike down along the trails and that, and I realized there's a great opportunity there that hasn't been thought through enough. And I looked at the fabric of the city, and I realized with the station and us bringing in these new jobs, it's just going to create this opportunity to really fuel that momentum that's going and almost be like a catalyst. And I just really can see it before my eyes. I mean, I've been involved in enough cities around the world that that the backbone there. The other thing is the people. I mean, I moved into your neighborhood, and man, does it feel like home. I mean, the people are so nice. And I love the diversity of the city, too. That's something I'm very think makes a community stronger. So, yeah, there's just so much potential, and a lot of good things going on.
So with regards to the phasing, this is a marathon. This is a major, major project. The scale that we're talking about, across the full 240 acres, obviously, that's not going to just be Google, not even a very small percentage of it will be, but it's going to take quite a while, right, for that to build out. And a lot of this is also going to revolve around the station itself and the timing of the transportation improvements. It's going to take time to finish, BART. It's going to take time for high-speed rail. It's going to take time for that station to really achieve its full fruition. And that's going to be an important piece to the puzzle in terms of being able to handle the density and the capacity that's necessary for the full implementation of the vision. So, we're anticipating it will be done, in phases over time. We really don't have any details yet. It's hard for us to say how much and in what time period. But, this is something that's going to take many years to play out.
All right, great. Thank you all. Sarah?
Hi, Sarah McDermott, representing South Bay Labor Council. I'm going to echo some comments that have already been made, but thank you for the presentation. And as I was looking at kind of the buckets you have here, community, nature, economics, during those three, housing crisis was running through my mind, as I'm sure you can imagine. And I do think the transportation-rich area is certainly helpful with that, but we have an issue that there's people within walking distance of the project who are likely to be displaced. Those might be people who are likely to be service workers who are going to be pushed out to places that aren't going to benefit from that public transportation, such as Hollister, Tracy, Montega. We have members that commute from there all the time. So I'm curious how you're thinking about that in your thinking of placemaking and housing.
So as you point out, housing is going to be a very important part of this development. It has to be. It's an important part of community. It's hard to think of a successful community that didn't have housing as an integral part of it. And when we do talk about housing, it has to be housing for all portions of the economy, right? And so we know that's a need. We know that's a goal, right? And part of, again, what we're hoping to do in working with this group and others is to figure out the best way to achieve it. I mean, there's, first of all, there's a flat-out volume goal. I mean, there's a certain amount of housing that just simply is going to have to get built. And, there are, I think, a lot of different ways that could be achieved. And we're really going to be interested in hearing from these folks, both in this room and elsewhere, about other ideas as to how it might happen. But, regardless of the volume, again, focus on how all aspects of society is going to be dealt with is going to be important. It's got to be able to work at a market level. It's also got to work at an affordable level. And it's got to work for all different types of workers if the community is going to be able to thrive. So, I mean, I think you're bringing up an extremely important and valid point. It's one that we know we're going to have to work with everyone to figure out.
Great, thank you. And that's a great segue to what we're going to be talking about later as well with the solution groups and what kind of solutions could come out of those discussions, including models and tools that we should be thinking about and kind of setting the next stage and the ideas you all bring to the table. So with that, Nadia, I think you were next.
I was actually going to say almost exactly what Sarah was going to say, is that I felt like of the buckets that you mentioned, housing was missing, and housing really needs to be one of the buckets when it comes to San Jose. You mentioned creating a community, and that read me a little bit the wrong way. I know that wasn't your intention, because there's already a community that exists. We don't need to create one. So I think as we talk about this development, it's not only how are we going to create community, but how are we going to preserve that community that already is here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Kevin?
Kevin Chrisman from the Gardner Neighborhood Association. And what I say kind of has to dovetail off of what Nadia was talking about there. First of all, thank you for your presentation, and I'm glad to hear that there is no, quote, master plan yet, unquote. but your design is going to affect neighborhoods that are even outside this Diridon neighborhood, especially mine. And we get to the fact that I appreciate you want to respect culture. But we do need new housing, but we also need to respect the existing neighborhoods that are there and the housing that some people in our neighborhood have owned for 3 and 4 generations. And probably one of the biggest issues with that is how this project integrates with high-speed rail and the form that it takes, whether it's anything, when we're thinking here outside the box, we could go, even still thinking maybe underground. There's the aerial option and also the at-grade. And the at-grade option actually just about devastates our neighborhood by the number of tracks and the number of single-family homes that it will take. And so one of the big things I'm here is to try and to preserve the existing culture of our neighborhood, which is largely Latino. And the other thing is I like what Harvey had to say about daylighting the Los Gatos Creek. This is a tremendous opportunity to get that back open. That if we don't do it now, it will never happen. And so just in conclusion, how you integrate your project with all the other things that are going on, that some of it you don't have control over, but you can heavily influence for the greater good. And I'd like to, I think that's what this whole group is here to work with you on, to do our best for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Laura.
Thank you, Laura Winter, St. Leo's neighborhood representative. First of all, thank you for a inspiring and exciting presentation. Your expertise and passion certainly came through, and I like that a lot. One of the things we need to think about is, as I'm sure you've realized, San Jose has some of the best climate in the country, if not the planet. And downtown San Jose has a lot of people wandering all the time, but we don't do a very good job of creating spaces where people congregate on a regular basis. And I think we have an opportunity here, especially with the 2 waterways, Los Gatos Creek and Guadalupe River, to really create something that San Jose, downtown San Jose, has been missing for a very long time. You see people walking through. What do we need to do to get people to stay and make additional connections? Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, that came up a lot. We do have that as one of those buckets of the solution group as well, the public spaces and connections and access. Thanks for bringing that up. Nathan, you haven't had a chance to speak. Go ahead.
Nathan Ho with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Just want to thank you for your presentation. And what resonated with me were 2 things. Well, one was a balanced outcome, and that got me thinking around, well, while that's a great phrase, it led me to think of inputs. So it's the inputs from this group, from us individually, from our organizations, but really the onus upon us all to work together, that these great ideas that Joe mentioned from the projects abroad, I'm sure came about from both community members and from the development staff. And so that I really will take to heart the slide, which is not up there now, but the slide with the various buckets and the 3 points, along with some other buckets that others have mentioned, that the onus is upon us to really envision what we can think of a world-class destination or urban district, as some other have said. So that's very exciting. And the second part has left my mind as I am talking, but I'm going to keep on talking in the hopes that it comes back.
It can always come
Oh
back.
yes, you want to echo the activating destination early. That just so pleased that Joe and I'm sure Mark have walked the sites, have walked downtown, and just thought about what a cool place that we could create at the same time preserving the culture, as you mentioned, and some other projects, but also community that we have in this downtown area. So I'm just so pleased that you're just as equally as excited as I am and others in the room.
Great, thank you, Nathan. Kathy?
Hi, my name is Kathy Sutherland, and I represent the Delmas Park neighborhood, which is within the Dearden area. And one of the things that I'd like to get a little bit more information on at some point in time is how you integrate existing neighborhoods within a very, very large development, especially as we've seen the recent purchases. It's surrounding our small, very historic neighborhood even more. And we just want to make sure that there's good integration and that the communities flow seamlessly together.
That's our wish as well.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Leslie?
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. So I'm both a downtown resident and I work downtown. I do a lot of walking around downtown, and I really am looking forward to this project moving forward. One of the things that I've seen, sort of like Kathy's talked about, the various properties that are being slowly assembled, is that there are other projects too, and this may end up being more of a city question than a Google question, is how does this project integrate with some of these other projects that are happening at the same time? And in that respect, you know, I'm with Silicon Valley at Home. Did I introduce myself? So I'm sorry, Leslie Corsilia with Silicon Valley at Home. So we're very interested in the housing piece, and as we add, not just your project, but all of these others, how do we think through housing and affordable housing in a way that makes sure that we're just doing the right planning? So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. Ben?
Hi, my name is Ben Pacho with the Silicon Valley Bike Coalition. Kind of follows the previous two comments about integration. Given the disparate nature of this project, what design principles are thinking about for facilitating connectivity between these different nodes, and if there are specific corridors you're looking at, and kind of how that might impact surrounding communities. Thanks.
We'll certainly want to engage with the community and identify that, and they're absolutely critical. In one of the projects that I demonstrated there, we really looked hard on how to integrate, say, the bicycle network into the regional bicycle network. So your point's right on, but we just need to understand that better and what are the opportunities.
I mean, just to further that, Google's been a very aggressive advocate for biking, right? If you've had a chance to be in the Mountain View area, you can see the Googlers obviously on the G-bikes riding all over the place. It's our preference to be able to get people around by bike, and we're working very hard now in the Sunnyvale area as well to establish a connected bike network in order to allow a similar thing to happen in Sunnyvale. Certainly would be our intent, right, to have a vibrant both pedestrian and bike capability in the downtown area, so we're not dependent on automobiles.
Yeah, looking at multiple modes of transportation is definitely something we heard consistently from you all, and we're definitely looking at as one of the solution groups as well. So we have time for a couple more questions. I'm going to let folks that haven't had a chance to speak, and then I'll come back to you, Harvey and Norma. Yes, Sandra.
Hi, Sandra Weber, Plant 51. We're actually right by Dearden Station, and we're very excited. Really enjoyed your presentation also, especially the integration part. I'm just going to hop on the back of Ben and say, with the, we're coming from Singapore, so our background is over there. And we see men in suits on 9 bots going to work. So, and I see scooters in the last 2 weeks, just, all over the place here. And that seems like a really recent trend. So just in forecasting, when you look forward, things can change rapidly. So not just looking at bikes, but definitely the PEVs and other modes of transportation that can rapidly change, and we could see men on suits on 9 bots. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Norma. So I'm going to go to Norma here, and then over to Harvey, and then...
Norma Camacho, Santa Clara Valley Water District. And I just had a question. You indicated there's not a master plan, but is there some type of plan for the type of facility that you're trying to develop here? Is there going to be like an R&D facility with Google here, or is it going to be more of like computer workstations, customer support? What is the idea that Google has in terms of the types of jobs that they'll be bringing here?
The reality is we really don't know yet. Google is a very dynamic place, and anything we would guess at today for something that would be many years out, the only thing I would know about my guess is it's wrong. We just change too rapidly. So, the only thing I would say is that most likely we're looking at a large group that would come and move into the San Jose area in its totality, as opposed to little bits and pieces of different groups. Most likely we would keep a team together, but which team it would be, very, very hard to say at this stage. But in general, the Google office environment tends to be around things like software engineers, although obviously our business continues to diversify in terms of hardware and cloud and things of that sort. So again, a little bit difficult to say, but it would definitely be in the tech genre.
And I think the other thing, there'll be a lot of focus on ensuring places are adaptable and flexible. We have to design for something that works today, but we do have to think in 1,000-year timelines. And so we got to balance those two things.
Great, thank you all. Harvey, final question.
And my question dovetails into that exactly. I've seen in the media that you're going to add about 20,000 jobs, give or take. And I understand that these are business decisions and the business cycle changes. The question I have is, what types of jobs are we talking about? Are you looking at adding 20,000 tech workers and then requiring another 2 to 3 people for support people who are not going to be paid as well? I'm just trying to get an understanding of what kinds of impacts will be coming to us.
I mean, we heard the 20,000 number ourselves. That's not really our number, right? In the sense that I think in terms of orders of magnitude, it's in the appropriate range, but we really don't know yet, exactly what kind of numbers we're talking about. I mean, whatever it is, there's going to be a core that would be Google itself, and then there's always other jobs that we would call temps, vendors, and contractors that are associated with Google that would also be part of the development. If you look at how things work currently in Mountain View and Sunnyvale, you'll see a combination of both the tech jobs and then also more support jobs that are associated with it.
Well, you're very good at data. Can you, at some point, provide us in examples of the number of support jobs that are required for each of your tech jobs?
Yeah, I think that will definitely be part of this process, is to be able to sort of project out, what kind of ratios we're talking about. And again, what we don't know still is even the exact nature of the groups that would come out here, and there are differences, right, between those groups and then how those things would be balanced. But we can look at the range of options that might exist. As Joe has said, we're going to have to sort of remain flexible to be able to adjust depending on what happens in the future, because things do change.
That makes it very important, because if someone is not paid as high a wage, they may not be able to live nearby, and then they'll require transportation options and a lot of other things that we have to look at.
Absolutely.
And
that's
low-income
part
housing.
of building a project that works for the whole community.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And Harvey, that's a perfect segue. You're always good at that, and getting us to the next segment of the agenda. We're going to talk about existing conditions. Thank you very much, Joe and Mark. Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to remind you all that the concepts, ideas, places that you draw inspiration from, I want you to really think about that and bring that forth. We're going to have representatives of Google at every meeting. They're going to be here to listen and absorb that information. It's going to be posted online. We really want you to think about that before the next meeting. So thank you again, everyone, for their time, and we're going to transition now to the next segment. Thanks all. Okay, existing conditions information. We sent you all a host of data to start to absorb some of the existing conditions. We're not going to go through everything in great detail here tonight. I just wanted to give you a very big overall kind of framework of what we have to date, recognizing that there's a lot of data that's still out there that we need to gather. But we started to pull some information based on what we know, basic statistics of the Diridon Station area. As you can see here, approximately a population of 2,150, about 740 households, 800 dwelling units, about 1,800 employment and jobs, excuse me. We also started looking at different areas around the station area, trying to gather information both within a 1-mile buffer and a quarter-mile buffer, recognizing that quarter mile is that kind of walkable distance of people that can actually access the site easily. As you can maybe see here, there's a lot of information that you asked for. The stuff highlighted here is what we were able to gather to date. A lot of information about land use and pipeline projects, housing, both renter, owner occupied. Some of the deed restricted affordable housing is in there as well. Demographics, health, education, a bit on economy. But again, we're going to keep this ongoing list going, and we want you to tell us what we don't have on this list and what other information you want, like Harvey just mentioned a second ago. There is an interactive map on the city's website that allows you to go in and actually access the existing land use and zoning. If you all haven't been there, it's fascinating. You should definitely check it out. Very fun to cruise through that as a planner. I love it. There's also a lot of detail about the permitting process. Again, all this great information is in the resource tabs connected to this project. We're also developing a project website that's going to be dedicated to this. It's going to be a little more user-friendly. We're hoping that will come online in the next couple weeks as well, so we'll keep you posted there. This list, which I'm sure you can read in great detail, just talks a little bit more about the pipeline projects, just showing that there is a lot out there currently, including a lot of housing that's currently in the pipeline, that's going through the process of review and through the planning. I'm not going to go through all of them here, but again, just wanted to give you a sense of what's out there now. This list is constantly getting updated depending on what's coming in through the pipeline. We could talk about that in a bit as well if there's any questions. Again, we try to look at both a mile buffer and a quarter-mile buffer just to get a sense of not only the station area, but its environs and what's going on around it. As you can see here, renters both within a quarter mile and a mile are around 65 to 70% of all housing. And this will all be available as well, again, on the project website. We'll post this on the website so everyone from the public as well can have this information. We looked at percentage of renters versus occupied. Again, I'm not going to go through all this in great detail, but just that generally kind of the information we have available. Again, this is owner-occupied housing in the area. It kind of shows that the dark red where the pockets of most owner-occupied housing is. We also looked at single-family homes in the area. The darker it gets, again, higher concentration of single-family homes in and around the area. Number of occupied homes as well. Deed restricted affordable housing, again, fantastic link on the city's website. Please look through it, but it gives you a good list. Here's some here of some of the deed restricted affordable housing. We're seeing around 1,100 within the Dearborn Station area, another 500 within the quarter-mile buffer. Again, a lot of information I know to absorb, but just wanted to flip through it quickly to give you a sense of what you have to look through over the next week or so, or how much long it takes to absorb it, and then we'll kind of talk about what this means to you and what the information that we gathered, what some of your outcomes might be. Apartment units, again, we looked at that, and that's another resource on the city's website that you can go to. We looked at demographics. This was interesting as well. As you can see, age demographics, there's a pretty good contingent of 25 to 40, made up about half of the population within a quarter mile, and only about 10% were between 5 and 17 currently. Again, within that quarter mile stretch, we thought that was interesting, but again, curious to hear what you all think about it as we move forward here. Demographics, we looked at race as well. Large population of white within a quarter mile, about 40% of the total makeup, but also about 32% or 32.5% of Hispanic, and about 50% of Hispanic within a mile. We thought that was interesting. We looked at education statistics, health, economy. Again, I don't want to go through all this right here, but just to give you a sense of the information that's available, mainly through census and other resources. Percentage not high school graduates, some without health insurance. Obviously, again, you can see large concentrations in the dark red. Health Disadvantage Index, this is from the Public Health Alliance of Southern California, just talking about what some of those not only economic, but I believe some environmental factors that might influence people's quality of life in the area. Median income, we have people below the poverty line, excuse me, poverty line. You can see again higher concentrations. It looks like just north, a northern area of the station area. We looked at parks and open space. Again, we know that parks and open space, we keep hearing how important that is to you all. We wanted to identify where those are currently, how we create connections to those parks and open spaces. And again, remind you all, as inspiration, we're not necessarily looking for stuff outside of the city. There's great inspiration right here within the city that we can draw from. And we want you all to bring that to the table and let us know what areas should be looked at more closely and what this project should consider. Environmental factors we looked at from the EPA. This is their different significant environmental impacts that they have identified as part of their processes, and we could talk about that a little bit more if we need to as well. And actually, that's it. So we flew through that. I know it's a lot of information. I know it's a lot more that you need to still absorb. Is there other information other than what you saw on that initial list, which maybe I'll go back to real quickly, just so you can see what we have and what else we can gather here? And I apologize, we try to pack it all in here. Is there anything that you see on this list? This is, again, the list that you all gave us that we have heard over the last few meetings. What else would you like to see that isn't currently on this list as we continue to gather information? Anything that you'd like to share? Yes, Maria.
Sorry, I'm still going through it, making sure I'm not going to say something that's up here and not highlighted.
Sure. Maria,
But
name and organization.
Maria
please.
Noel Fernandez with Silicon Valley Rising. I just caught my attention was on the demographics, that it's a quarter mile and a mile radius. And when we're talking, many of us are talking about displacement and gentrification. Our concern is absolutely that area, but it's also bigger than that, particularly thinking about the east side and other pockets of poverty across the city and even the region. So I wonder when we're looking at the demographics, if we could actually get the demographics that are from a larger radius, and if we can get those data points that have been created by UC Berkeley around where we suspect there might be gentrification and displacement, and where we're already seeing it.
That's a great suggestion, Maria. Definitely, we could look into that. Yes, Bill.
I was wondering if
Bill,
this
name
is
and
a lot of
organization,
information.
please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Bill Souders from Downtown Residents Association. This is a lot of great information. I'm wondering if there is a resource or resources within the city where we could ask clarifying questions or get a little bit more insight on some of this stuff. Because just reading this, I mean, what you just said is an important factor as well, but even the implications of some of this data is not always so obvious.
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. So I think we should all consider, these slides and, we're going to put this into Word as well, kind of a living, breathing document that not only will come back to this group with some of this additional information or the information that Maria just said, but we're also going to put it on the website, but make it available and go to a deeper level when we go into those solution groups so that we have more specificity around some of these issues. So we're going to talk about solution groups in a minute and kind of the meeting structure. Part of that first meeting will be kind of an initial shot of, some of this, but then what else is needed. So I think this will be a pretty iterative process between staff and the SAG on this data coming back to you.
Thanks, Lee. Leslie.
Leslie Hamilton, Guadalupe River Park Conservancy. Before my current position, I worked for the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State, and they did funded a lot of pedestrian studies. I don't think the quarter-mile mark is very useful. It's a 5-minute walk. I think that in the studies that I recall, a 10-minute, half-mile was much more useful. I'm also like to ask for finer granularity on some of your maps. You show Guadalupe River Park as impoverished, which it kind of is, but there, it would be nice to have to show public spaces and whatnot. And so this to me this misrepresents what we're looking at.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, right now the information is available at a block group level, so it's not very granular, but we can get down to that level based on some of the information we have. And I want to remind you that you all are a great resource here as well. I mean, you're all experts, you're all community members and have access to a lot of information that we or the city might not have access to, so please bring that information to us as well so we can share that with the group if we're definitely missing something. With the half-mile radius, that's a great suggestion as well. We could look into that for sure. Jeffrey.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate the point that Harvey made earlier. I think it would be great to have a look at some of the information about the jobs within Google. I think in the last meeting, there was a point raised around inclusion in some of the studies that Google's done about the racial and gender makeup of their workforce and various roles of their workforce. Another great resource that we can provide, a colleague of ours, Chris Benner, had to crunch some numbers looking at the subcontracted service workers and different lines of work that's subcontracted by the tech industry. And yeah, to Harvey's earlier point, they're paid about 1/5 of the directly employed workforce. And so I think it's really important for us to have that kind of base of knowledge as we think about this project and perhaps what the various points of how it intersects with what the demographics of our city is and what jobs they may have access to, folks who actually live here. So, yeah.
Great. Appreciate that, Jeffrey. We'll add that to the list. John.
John Pettigo, PACT. It would be interesting, I think another data point would help us determine some of the poverty levels on a more granular level is really looking at SNAP recipients related to school enrollment and what percentage of the students in the area schools are receiving free lunches, lunch assistance. To me, I think that and also the literacy level in third grade, that would tell us a little bit about the level of education, what kind of folks are living in that area. Because who's going to be displaced is really the question that we're looking at, and where will they be displaced to?
Thank you, John. Yeah, I think you brought that up at one of the meetings as well. We're still kind of gathering information, but that's a great point. Thank you very much, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy from Delmas Park. One of the things I'd like to have a discussion on too is education, and education particularly for elementary school kids, because the whole Google complex, I believe that their neighborhood school is across the freeway. And as anybody who's listened to me for a while knows, kids have to cross an at-grade on and off ramp onto 280 to hit their elementary school, and that's beginning in kindergarten. And so I think that as we talk about access to education, I think that that's one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of children living in the neighborhood.
Great point. Thanks, Kathy. Nadia.
Nadia Aziz, the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley. On the housing point, I'd be interested to know the number of rent-controlled units in the area, both the quarter and the mile radius, along with the deed-restricted affordable housing. Any that's at risk, it's in the housing element, and that means that any affordable housing that's at risk of losing its deed restriction within the next 7 or so years. And the other thing that I was wondering about is if there's a way to identify which community-based organizations, nonprofits, organizations that serve our community are located within a quarter mile or a mile, just so that we know where the service organizations are, and also what the impact of this development might have on those organizations.
Great point. Thanks, Nadia. I think we had some of the information about the affordable housing and deed restricted, but we'll look into that and make sure that we get to that granular. And the services is a great point. We'll make sure we get those on a map as well. Norma.
Yeah, what I'd like to see is just an examination of what...
Norma, name and organization, sorry.
Excuse me, Norma Camacho, Santa Clara Valley Water District, is to identify some of the hazards that may exist in the area. For instance, flood hazards. Is it a special flood hazard zone? Earthquake hazards? Is it near faults? Have there been previous contamination at the site? Are there the existence of underground storage tanks, existing plumes that are lying undisturbed at this point in time? That might be good to draw out at this point.
Thank you, Norma. Thank you very much. Looks like we have a couple more here. Yes, Ben.
Ben with the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. Given the city's adoption of Vision Zero, I think it would be great to see the inclusion of the city's high injury network and specific locations of traffic fatalities and serious injuries.
Great, thank you, Ben. And again, some of that information you might have great access to. Please share it with us and we can make sure we incorporate it. Thank you for that. I'm going to go here to Pete and then we'll come back to you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, Pete Goldstead, the Market Avenue Neighborhood Association. I love these charts. They tell a lot, but I think to Leslie's point before, these are sparsely populated areas, 2,000 people in this whole giant space, and the numbers get skewed. So 27.1% of people below the poverty line is at 7 people. You know, we need some scale. Could we get this in data form and an interactive map. And I think that would solve a lot of problems for a lot of us where we could go click, here, click, 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 summarize everything, and get all the information of that one area and focus down.
You know, that's a great question. I do know that the city has some interactive maps. We put these together based on some of the information we have. We can see if we can match some data sources to them, just Excel sheets, so we can be organized in that way. So we'll look into that for sure. Sure. Jeffrey, did you have one last comment, or were you all set? No, all set. Okay,
Congrats,
great.
take it down.
Excellent. Well, thank you again very much. This was huge in moving us forward. As Lee mentioned, this will continue to be an ongoing conversation. This information will live on the city's website. We'll dive much deeper into this data and information as we move into the solution groups. And that's also a great segue, if I can get to that slide, to the solution groups. I'm going to hand it off to Lee.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so solution groups. So this is a kind of a topic that we introduced last time. As I stated earlier, kind of our mandate and coming under the umbrella of the Brown Act, it changes our approach a little bit. So we've added a little bit of structure that I still think, you know, we get to where we wanted to be as a group. So just as a reminder, there's 38 people on the SAG. For us to do real deep dives on some of these policy issues would take 3-4 years. What we want to be able to do is pull some of these buckets out, do a deeper dive with some of the data, and then report back to the SAG. Rely on all of your expertise, and we'll bring in staff expertise into these areas to help formulate solutions around some of these challenges or opportunities. So that's what we're going to do. They're going to function, they're going to be somewhat self-directed with support from city staff such as myself, Lauren, Dave, Kim, and then other staff as needed depending on the bucket to help, you know, facilitate if needed, but also to bring back information. And so you will be identifying data or information needs and requests to help support your process. And what we're going to do is really see if we can get some of these done in 2 meetings and then bring back some initial feedback to the SAC. So the first is really discuss the topics. And we are going to kind of walk away tonight with a better understanding of what these 5 buckets are going to be. But the first meeting is really going to be around kind of the possible solutions or concerns that we have in this specific area. And then we'll go back with some direction from you all and staff, whether it's information or, hey, does another city do something like this, best practices work, and bring it back to you so you can further develop some of these solutions. And then the third thing, we'll be reporting back to the SAG, and we're going to go over the timeline so you can see when that'll happen. They're going to be staggered out kind of meetings, I think 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I think the big change in these is before I said these were going to be completely open to everyone. Obviously now with the Brown Act, we do have a bit of restrictions there. So what we're going to do is I want to encourage everyone to volunteer for 1 or 2 of these. You do not have a mandate to participate. So if you think your decision making and you're perfectly comfortable in this environment and want to stay here, that's fine. You don't need to volunteer for one of these. Each group is going to be limited to 10 or 12 members. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send out an email later this week with either some really cool technology poll or a real simple form that you will prioritize your top 3 groups that you'd like to participate in. And then Dave and I will go through and try to accommodate everyone's needs. So these 5 groups, 10 to 12 members, we would come back to you in the next meeting also with a schedule of when those would start meeting. More than likely they'll be at night to accommodate everyone's work schedule and in this building and completely open to the public. Second, we tried to think through how each of these groups for continuity would report back into the SAG. So as I mentioned, we're going to kind of try to define the topic that's going to be addressed and what success looks like. That's going to be really important. As well as what the data is going to do is we really want to identify kind of a baseline set of conditions. And that's where the work that's been done thus far, but also the tools, city requirements that are already on the book. You guys might want to do something and we can say, well, wait a minute, we already have a policy that does that, or someone else is going to do that. Thirdly, the opportunities that we have with this. We've talked a lot about that. I could probably pick out 4 or 5 already that I know are going to come out just based off of the conversations. But those opportunities and then funnel into the solutions. And this is, where we'll really dive into meeting number 2 on what those possible solutions are. These, could be, as we say the word qualitative or quantitative. These can take really any form, and we want to be completely flexible to you guys in the way you develop these possible solutions. So the table down below is kind of just a possible construct and framework that we're going to follow. But again, we're going to try as staff to be as nimble through this process as we can. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dave, because we're going to take a shot at further refining kind of what these 5 buckets are. Sorry, we have a few questions. So I think Jonathan had a question first, and then I'll go to Leslie, and then I'll hand it over.
Jonathan Martinez, Georgetown and Cahill Homeowners Association. Can the alternates participate in these subgroups?
I believe so, yes. Yeah. I don't think there's any restriction around that. I think that's fine. That was the other question? The question was, can an alternate participate in one of the committees? And I think yes. And I'll clarify that with the attorney's office, and I'll do that clarification and come back to you. And I will say, when I send out the email, think about what you want to participate in, but also, it's really important. We're not here just for like-minded opinions, how we're going to all agree on something. It's about having differing opinions. So you might not be interested in one subject, but you might want to know more about it and add a different point of view. That's going to be really important. That's part of civil discourse, and we have the group agreements to come back to. So, I'm not mandating that you volunteer for any of these, but I think it'd be really good to have kind of broad participation, and then everyone kind of knowing 2 or 3 things on a detailed level when we come back in to put this thing all together.
Okay, I'm back again. So these solution group topics that we have listed here, we realize they're large buckets. We're trying our best to keep this to around 5 solution groups, recognizing that we're going to try to have 2 meetings with these groups over the next few weeks to couple months, and we want to be able to get to a point where we have solutions to bring back to the group, and at the same time really respect your time that's going into this. And we've heard from others as well. We added a couple extras here, including the neighborhood quality of life. You've seen transportation access and traffic. You've seen jobs, education, economic development. Housing, displacement, and gentrification obviously has come up repeatedly. And parks, public space, and sustainability. So we have these 5 buckets identified now. And I want to just point out that we have these cross-cutting topics that we anticipate every group thinking about as you go through the process, including how the solutions will impact people's lives, how will the solutions impact equity and opportunity, what are the implications, again, for the surrounding neighborhoods, even if we have a subgroup, or a solution group on neighborhood quality of life, the neighborhoods surrounding this area are going to be impacted by every single one of those topics. So we really want you to think about that. And then, as we talked about before, really what are the potential models, solutions, and options that should be considered? That's really the key driver of this entire process. So with that, I want to turn it back over to you all to let us know if we've got these 5 buckets correct or if there's others we should be thinking about. So, Bill, I saw yours go up first.
I actually was going to ask kind of a tactical question about the groups. Are these groups, is it okay to bring in other community members? Does this become kind of a community outreach solution of sorts, or should we stay away from that?
Yes, so they are open to the public. And we've avoided the term subcommittee, but for all intents and purposes with the Brown Act, it is a subcommittee. So the actual structure does need to be groups and individuals that are here, or we're going to check on the alternates. But again, they're open to the public. We're going to do our best to advertise them in addition to the other meetings.
And bring people in as speakers or whatever it makes
Correct.
sense for us to make intelligent suggestions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great duo here. This is nice. Yeah, one more.
And then I was going to answer your question that you raised is there anything else? As a downtown resident, I'm looking at years of disruption and construction and things like that. I'm just wondering if that shouldn't be something on there that we take into account.
Can you clarify that? You said destruction and construction?
Well, it's
What-
kind of linked to the very early activation.
Okay.
I mean, we learned lessons when we did light rail, and I'm just wondering if that's not already, if I don't see it embedded in there, I don't know if it should be a topic of conversation.
That's a great question. So the original Good Neighbor Committee, actually, one of the requirements was a construction mitigation plan that would need to be developed. You know, not just for the baseball stadium, but for all levels of transit coming into the area. And I would suggest that that kind of fits under neighborhood quality of life.
Okay.
Thank you, Lee. Yes, Maria.
Maria Noel Fernandez with Silicon Valley Rising. I was hoping to hear a little bit more about the grouping of jobs, education, and economic development, because that's like a lot, just to say a little. And so one of the things that we've articulated, I think heard from several folks, is around jobs being a big area and education being a big area. And I am concerned about putting these three topics together and being able to actually have a robust conversation that would result in anything helpful. So would love to hear the thinking, and then also invite others to give their thoughts around that as well. But I am worried about that bucket.
Yeah, so that's a really helpful suggestion. You know, I would say from you know, a staff perspective, you know, we're trying to create, you know, and Dave said, cap it at 5 to make it manageable for us, so we're able to bring you the information and do the staff work in between these meetings and these groups. But totally understand that one group may be a bit ambitious. I would say I would side on the caution of, you know, we're trying to do 2 meetings. There could be that group and another group where we need to do a third or a fourth time, and I do think we've got the time and flexibility to do that, though.
Sarah.
Yeah, I had the same concern about that group. So I would just agree that we either need to section them out or devote more time to those topics, and particularly not come up with like one solution that we think solves all 3 of them just because it mentions them in the title. But the other thing I had was just on the bringing the public in and having public comment at these meetings. I know as a committee member, I would, especially in these solutions groups, like to hear a lot more from the public. I understand some of the reasoning why we're leaving public comment at the end of these meetings, but as you can see from the audience, like at least half of the people have left, if not more. So I do have concerns about that. So in addition to like when we have public comment, making sure that we have this at times that are accessible for people, especially for like jobs and education, making sure that it's accessible to working people who have kids is important.
That's a great point, Sarah. We'll definitely be cognizant of that to make sure that we allow for folks to come and share their ideas and make it at times as convenient. And just one follow-up to your initial point, we see these as large topics or kind of big picture, high-level topics, and then each within them have subtopics that will have individual solutions for those subtopics. So what this table shows you, those topics running down the left-hand side, would really actually probably should say subtopics that could each have their own background, opportunities, and solutions, so it wouldn't necessarily have to all be gathered under one potential solution. So that's a great point, and something to think about as we go through this. Okay, I know am I missing anyone? No? Jeffrey?
Yeah, just a question on the timing around this. I'm a little bit concerned seeing the kind of earlier schedule. So we created a subcommittee on, you know, for instance, the housing displacement and gentrification. It meets 2 to 3, 4 times, however many times, brings back for a presentation. I think we teed it up for the August meeting of this group. And then all of a sudden, those recommendations are supposed to be incorporated by city staff into a forthcoming memorandum of understanding with Google. And it just, I'm a little worried that like the timing of this will do good work, but you know, for the whole thing to really come together and for it to actually make its way into the framework of the MOU, like those ideas would have had to come to the table much, much earlier. And, you know, the city and Google will be negotiating and intensely about what that agreement looks like. I just worry a little bit, our good ideas will kind of be all for naught because the cake's already baked by the time we present, or else it's just unrealistic to think that an MOU is brought to council, 2 weeks later based off of our advising in a late August presentation.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask Kim to jump up and kind of talk about the timing of the MOU, but it was not our intent to bring an MOU in August at all.
Or September, I thought, the last presentation.
No, actually, so this group will, as we said, it's going to go on for a long time, but this intense body of work will hopefully wrap up toward the end of August. So we've been really clear in our discussions with Google and our planning that we then have September and October to really bring that MOU to the point where it needs to be by, say, going to council in November with our deadline of December, because we wanted to make sure that this process didn't feel rushed. And then, like you're saying, that once we have a product or a preliminary draft product, then we'll start working on the MOU and the discussions with Google that relate to your community input. And we've set aside time in September and October to do that.
That's helpful. I think it would be good to update. I know it's been changing, and we've had a couple different presentations that have different timelines, but that's helpful to know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think we're going to, staff, the facilitator staff, we're spending a lot of time over the next few weeks on some of those regional meetings, actually booking those. We're going to come back with the solution group, the meeting dates, the locations. I do think we'll have a much more firm timeline for the group on the website in the coming week, but also when we come back as in a group in 3 weeks. So a lot of that will be nailed down.
Great, thanks, Jeffrey. Ben. Just really quick, Ben, Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. So I just kind of wanted to get your sense of what you envision Google's role in these subcommittees, and kind of so that they're clued in as these developments unfold in this work.
Yeah, you always leave those ones to me. I would say just, Michael or Google is another participant in this process. So I think they are free and clear to, just as you guys do, nominate themselves or pick the 3 they'd like to participate in. Obviously, it's important that those groups are reporting out in an appropriate way to this group, so Michael and others at Google can kind of hear those concerns. I think that's the more pressing part in the near term.
And I would just add in on that. This seems like a fantastic opportunity for all of us to really engage in this subject matter, to create some. Mike, hello? Oh, can you hear me?
Name and organization. I know they know you by now.
Michael Flynn, Google. It just seems like a fantastic opportunity for us collectively to really dive into these topic areas. And Google's really interested to take part in that process and really understand the outcomes of this.
Great, thank you, Michael. So, Maria, I think we'll take you as the last question here.
I just wanted to quickly follow up on something Maria Noel Fernandez, Silicon Valley Rising. Something that Bill raised in terms of process of being able to make recommendations on experts to bring into these subcommittees. How should we be doing that, and what does that process look like, and how can we also make sure we're tapping the expertise in the room, because there's so many folks that can really bring their expertise to this.
Absolutely. So I think once we kind of get the groups formed, each of us will probably be point on a group and reach out to the group to kind of get a sense of what those needs are going to be, and that will really be kind of the first meeting. What those needs are going to be. So if there's any best practices work, or hey, we'd really like to know how this city did this with we can bring those into the first meeting or the second group, so that we will be working collectively with you to kind of decide how that gets done. But I think that's a wonderful suggestion to bring in the outside expertise. We're going to go into public comment now, and Dave's going to do that, but I do want to make the announcement, if anyone did not fill out a speaker card, please do so. They're in the back. And if anyone is in council chambers still that filled out a comment card, they should make their way over here now.
Yeah, just to close the loop on this before we do, sorry. But I wanted to confirm that these now are the buckets that we're going to look at. Maria, to your point, we could look at potentially moving education out of that group and have it on its own. We could, when we email you all out, if you have any input on that or want to be specifically part of that topic area or a solution group, we could look at that time and just get that finalized as we move forward. So, sound good? Okay. On we go to public comment. I believe we have a few comment cards here. Make sure this is working. All right. So first name I have is Brian Grayson, if you can step up to the mic.
Dave, this is Nathan from Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Just a suggestion, if you could read the next three names, just so people can queue up so that we can get people ready.
Sure.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Brian Grayson, Preservation Action Council. Just a couple of comments on the public process. One, whatever documents have been provided to the committee, as best I can tell, have not been posted on the website since the beginning, other than the presentation from the first meeting and the minutes. So if there have been documents that have been going to the committee, it would be helpful to have those posted and available to the public. Also, the minutes don't properly reflect the public comments. It indicates only who the speakers were, and I think just a line item about what comments were made. I think some of the comments have been valuable, not necessarily mine, but others have been, and I think it'd be good as a permanent record to have that in the minutes. And also, the opportunity, I think, tonight was missed in the after the Google presentation. There were I think, some very positive things that came out of that. As you may know, historic preservation does not have a voice on this panel, so we're looking to you, many of you, to be that voice, and I think an opportunity was missed to not just raise the issue that there's a lot of historic resources on those sites that we're talking about, and the fact that the presenters aren't here to hear this now dilutes even further my making the comment. So I think it's very important, and we ask that hopefully you'll keep that in mind as the discussions continue. Thank you.
Brian, could you, as a member of Preservation Action Council, San Jose, can you provide us with a list of those? Because I don't know, I know some of the bigger
I can, although it's in the Diridon Station EIR. I can provide that, which
and can you
lists a
provide it
number
to
of them.
staff so they can provide it to the
Sure,
entire group?
I'm sure the city has a copy, but I can certainly do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, in the future, folks, the SAG shouldn't directly report back to the public. If we take those comments back, then we could come back and give them those answers at the next meeting. And Brian, just real quick to your question, everything is starting to be posted to the website, including summary notes that have all the comments from the SAG members as well as the public as well. So that should be getting posted up there soon. The minutes don't. The minutes are just who the speakers were. Right, right. So, okay. So to Nathan's point, I'm going to ask for Larry Ames, Danny Garza, and then Blair Beekman. Should know that. Go ahead.
So my comments are basically for when Google was here, because I think you've already heard me say this before, that the Los Gatos Creek Trail adds off-street transit to the area. It now goes from basically Midtown and Willow Glen all the way up to the Santa Cruz Mountains, and it's this last mile will tie everything together and will connect to the Guadalupe. It'll add transit to the Google end for Diridon both. Echo Harvey's comments about freeing the creek from the pipe and fix up the Los Gatos, Guadalupe as a attraction for the area, make kind of a river walk, make it an attraction area. Also, we have excellent biking weather here. It was noted, we have perfect biking weather. People can commute 3, 4, 5 miles quite easily. So you have a lot of residents can come in from the east side. So when you're planning these things, plan for bike bridges over 101. Ask for connections to the area so people can get to the area. Make the whole area here an attraction. So it's not a self-controlled, enclosed or fenced-in area, but be inviting and be enmeshed in the area. And I also had my notes here to embrace the historic structures in the community, tie into the area. Don't just pave over everything, but use they add character and variety to the area. And this area should be mixed use. You don't want it to be just businesses only. You want to have it so it's not a desert in the weekends. You want people to live in there. So I think I'm echoing the comments that there. So it was for these people here, but you've heard me talk before, so thank you.
Thank you. And just remind folks, you do have Representative Google here in the room. You have Javier here in the crowd. You have Michael. So it's definitely being heard. So don't think it's not being heard. And Danny, I believe you're next. If you could let us know your name when you step up as well.
Thanks. Okay, cool. Danny Garza, Mexican American Political Association Chapter Chair. Today, I am here also as Plata Arroyo Ad Hoc, recently retired Director at Large. Now, also, to my comments, I'm a 30-year retired union iron worker. And the two gentlemen from Google aren't here, but these gentlemen are. I appreciate that. The gentleman said that Google in Canada worked with employees that had federal offenses. But I want to make sure in San Jose, the people from the east side, a lot of construction workers, not unlike myself, fortunately, I didn't have a federal offense. Some employees on the east side have federal offenses. And you cannot work at HP, you cannot work at Intel, you cannot work at Lockheed Martin, NASA. You can't work there with federal offenses. If Google does that here, you're going to cut the east side out. So I'm here to support Maria, labor, and the issues of getting minorities working at Google. Union, non-union, hopefully union, but yeah, I know. But they need to go to work. Otherwise, you're cutting out half of the working population here in San Jose. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. After Blair, we're going to have Tessa Woodmansey and Shawnee Kleinhaus. Excuse me.
Hello. Thank you for the meeting. I liked the maps that you were showing at the end. I hope in future meetings, you guys are in your subcommittees now, that those maps and talking about all the conditions of those maps can be more of a part of this process. And my other big point of noticing tonight's meeting, I thank Google for the words, but I was hoping that there would just be a bit more talk about the new BART that's just been approved for downtown. And the ideas of construction were mentioned, and things like that, how that's going to work into all of this. I guess I've made my point clear. I'm working on accountability issues for the future of technology in San Jose, and it's about peace, and it's about better democracy and community in the future. And in the downtown area, as we're all talking in really nice, noble terms about the future of our downtown and its diversity and all those good things, you know, we're all very brave and strong at this time. There is something close to a disaster downtown with a technology project called the Big Belly Smart Trash Can project that is a technological nightmare, I feel. And it's going to really hurt the poorest of the poor that are downtown, and it's specifically meant to dislocate those people and to make them leave. And I feel it's a horrible program, and I again ask you to look into it, and we're working on gentrification issues right now in downtown, and that's part of the mayor's plans in his remaining time in office. So I hope we can learn to integrate what we're doing here to really talk to the mayor about how to communicate. It's a VTA project, and that the mayor's on, and that is a part of, and that we learn to talk about communication better and openness. Thank you for all of downtown.
Thank you, Blair. Tessa.
I'm Tessa Woodmansey, and I live in the Garden Alameda neighborhood. And one thing I didn't understand, I mean, I listened to who's on this board, and I'm glad everybody's here, appreciate everybody's community involvement, but the Garden Alameda never got really included. And we're on that corridor of Stockton Avenue, and that's the Garden Alameda to the west of Stockton. And, you know, I don't know how this panel ever got created, but anyway, we never got heard that we could be part of it. So we didn't. So anyway, here I am, and we appreciate, though, having the opportunity to talk. And so one of the issues, like we always talk about downtown, and yet the corridors that are going into downtown, like Stockton Avenue, like Taylor Street, as it turns into Nagley and goes downtown as well, we need those to be really livable streets that have good traffic calming. Stockton Avenue really needs traffic calming. That the Alameda has been improved, and a lot of the speed is now coming onto Stockton Avenue because the Alameda has a lot of traffic, great traffic calming. But we still don't have bike lanes on the Alameda, and we really need bike lanes on all the major streets. So we have a bike lane on Stockton Avenue, but people are going like 80 miles an hour down that street, and so it doesn't make it safe for bikers, and there's a lot of accidents on that street. And so we really want that street to become a livable street by having a tree-lined median in the middle, the way out the Alameda has. So we need that street as an entree into downtown to be improved. So that's one issue. And then, of course, the Taylor Street corridor is also another area that really needs to be improved. And there's a lot of problems with speed on that street as well. So we need a bike lane on that street all the way to Winchester and to downtown. And so those are just the issues of the not only thinking about downtown. They always say, well, we're going to have separated bike lanes downtown, but we need it on all our major streets.
Thank you, Tessa. Shawnee's next, and then we have Sandy Perry and Marcy Gersten.
Thank you. I'm Shani Kleinhaus with Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. For someone who's been advocating in San Jose for nature and birds and creeks for a long time, the presentation by Google that looks at the triple bottom line and actually includes the word nature was very, very refreshing. And I really like to see that actually materialize. What I'm missing in the 5 buckets is how do you bring that nature into those buckets? Usually it comes in mitigation. Oh, we want to do this. We're going to mitigate this way. Well, here, there is an opportunity to actually include the landscape and nature in the plan itself instead of mitigating for it later. And because of that, there are a couple of things that I saw as missing in the buckets. Norma, you talked about hydrology. Other people talked about the creeks. Creeks don't fall into parks and into all these other things. And you have 2 creeks or a river and a creek in this plan. And that landscape should be really part of the discussion very, very deeply and see how that gets integrated rather than mitigated. And I think the hydrology issue in a place like that is really, really strongly important. So my request to the team that's working on it is to figure out how to bring that in, and maybe you need another bucket. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe we have Sandy next.
Hi, I'm Sandy Perry. I'm with the Affordable Housing Network of Santa Clara County. I'm also associated with Silicon Valley Rising. My main concern is that we stop displacement. There was a article in the paper yesterday. They asked people, what's causing the housing crisis in Silicon Valley? And the number 1 answer was real estate developers. The number 2 answer was tech companies, but I don't hear the tech companies addressing this issue. I didn't hear the gentleman tonight addressing this issue. We need some kind of guarantees that this project is not going to displace more people. We already have enough people displaced. These people that Danny's talking about on the east side are being pushed out. Everybody says we've got wonderful diversity in San Jose. Well, less and less. Look at what happened in Mountain View. Mountain View's diversity is decreasing. It's going down because of the tech industry. We have got to have responsible development. We've got to have Google make a pledge not to displace one more person with this project. The kind of vague proposals and the vague answers we heard tonight are not adequate. We're suffering from just a major crisis, which another thing you didn't see on these nice slides that were up here, you didn't see the tents on the sidewalks like we have downtown. Is that because Google is just going to sweep people out and push them into the creeks, which Ms. Camacho was talking about? That's not acceptable. We have to address this issue. Displacement, homelessness, this has been going on for 40 years, ever since the tech industry took off here in Silicon Valley. And it's gotten worse and worse and worse, and it's getting worse right now as we speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Next up is Marcy Gersten, and our final speaker is going to be Catherine Mathewson.
My name is Marcy Gersten with PACT, People Acting in Community Together. I want to reiterate, I really appreciate Sarah's comments about public comment, and someone else talked about it as well, and I want to suggest, and it was raised in the Brown Act discussion today, that public comment can occur at or after each topic. And that's something to consider that might make a lot more sense. as we're hearing tonight. My mind is still reeling a little bit from that Brown Act discussion, and I guess I just have to say good luck to you all with that. But honestly, I was, I'm coming to all the meetings, and I was trying to put together what we heard tonight with what we heard at the last meeting about the NDAs, and frankly, I'm trying to figure out how the NDAs signed by the council members work in conjunction with the Brown Act and the City Sunshine Act. That's just something that I'm ruminating about still. But I want to reiterate, I thought the presentation by Google was really refreshing. I think we heard that word. And I appreciated a lot of what I heard, except I heard a lot of downtown, downtown repeatedly. And we need to be clear, as we're hearing from other folks, from some of you folks, that this is not just downtown, it's not just Diridon, it's this whole area. We need to encourage Google to have that broader vision. They talked about some really great broad ideas, huge ideas. I mean, a water treatment plant, it's amazing. They need to think broadly like that about our community as well and about San Jose. And so I think we need to encourage that. I also want to just also reiterate Sandy's point, the Google effect. It's already happening. I talked to folks at PACT who are already being, not only their rents being raised, but they're being told, Google people are knocking on my door, so if you can't pay the rent, they will. It's happening now. And we need to be clear, it's happening all around San Jose. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy. Final speaker is Catherine Mathewson.
Good evening. I'm a native San Josean K through 12 graduate, and I live about a half a mile from the Diridon station. I'm sorry I was late, but all the doors were locked, so I'm here. Two things. Diridon is separated from downtown by two very strong lines. One is 87, and the other one is the Guadalupe River. I would love to see that a design to get the 87 maybe underground or to some extent not above ground and Guadalupe become more more integrated with the connection. So people are, when they leave Diridon, they really want to go downtown and don't have that division. That needs to be worked out. I'd love to see pedestrian paths along Guadalupe Path. I'm finding that the bikers and pedestrians do not go together. When I grew up, pedestrians had to have licenses, and I don't think they have any rules today. So think about that. I think a large park, so that there is Guadalupe has a line, but then there would be a park that could be, say, like a wildlife sanctuary or something. So it expands it. Google, I'd love to see having self-sustaining buildings where, all the water, everything, all the electricity is generated at the building, and having roof gardens. That is a very progressive green thing, and love to see this happen for our community finally. Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of the meeting. I want to review a few next steps and meeting schedules with you all. And I think if I click next, yes, it blows it up a little bit, thank God. So just a few changes, and like I said, to Jeffrey's question, we're going to be coming back with kind of an official timeline at the next meeting, so things will be more fleshed out. One change I wanted to talk to you guys about is those citywide meetings on the very top, 1 through 4. Those were originally going to start in May. Just due to us kind of shifting and coming up with these solution groups and staff needing to spend some time there, we're going to push those back to the end of June so that we have a bit more time to plan. We're going to be, several of you asked to help with those and reach out to your organizations, your support groups. So between now and the next meeting and the following meeting, we will be doing that with several of you. And then We also, probably not this week, but the following week, will be sending out 2 voluntary meetings for any of you who want to participate that will be open to the public. And those are the walking tours of the Dearden Station area. We heard from several of you that that was very important for you to see. So we're likely to offer one on a weeknight and then one probably on a Saturday morning, just to, so we can hit everyone's schedule appropriately. Are you giving me 2 minutes? Thanks. That's great. That'd be great. So as we go forward to next meeting, we are going to hear more about the station, the actual station at Dearden Station, and all the multimodal transportation coming through there. And our Department of Transportation with several of our agency partners here will help lead that conversation. And then we're going to do Ideas for Dearden, or TED Talks, which I'm excited about. So let's talk a little bit about those. This is your opportunity to be creative. Submit, your idea. I'm the least creative person in this room, so I'm just going to throw out something that I heard today. I'm willing to bet everyone pizza at 4th Street Pizza on me that probably someone in this area of the room does a presentation on daylighting the Los Gatos Creek. So that's kind of the stuff we're looking for. What's something that we've heard? Another great example, Kathy Sutherland, about the access to elementary schools. Maybe that's an idea you want to present on. So to ensure that we kind of all do this, they're going to be 5-minute presentations, so 5 slides, fairly quick, with Q&A. And can I just see kind of an initial, who's interested in doing this? Just raise their hand. Okay. So in all likelihood, this will probably bleed over into the next meeting after that as well, which is fine, because we want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to do this. So I'm going to send out an email reminder and try and get people to say, yes, I'm officially and I'm going to do this. We'll collect the presentations from you the Friday before on the 27th, so we can just get them queued up. Feel free and team up. If you don't want to do it on your own, Kathy, you want to team up with John, feel free and go ahead. But what I'll try and do is, if we can get the presentations, give you an idea of when you will be on the agenda. Yes, Kim Walsh. You can just talk. You don't have to do slides. I'm very visual, so I need slides to learn, but you are all different, so you don't have to do slides. But again, this is meant to be fun. It's meant to be creative, so throw stuff out there. Doesn't matter if it doesn't stick, or if you think it's going to be controversial, or even if you think someone else is going to do the same exact presentation. Doesn't matter. Lastly, I think we sent out a few different emails after letters coming into city staff in this process that didn't necessarily get to the committee. So you're going to see more emails from either myself or Tara Reed, who you've not met yet but is supporting this effort. So if you have communications that need to go out, and part of the Brown Act thing is don't reply all to an email, but you can send it to us and we can share it with the group. So please send it to Tara Reed or myself. And then our next meeting is going to be April 30th. You're going to get a lot of communication from me between now and then, just about the meeting, the solution groups, the TED Talk, so I apologize in advance for that. And then before April 30th, hopefully the DeardenSJ.org website will be substantially different. And we're going to kind of switch to a different platform, so we have much more flexibility over the summary minutes, and also some online engagement tools that we want to kind of pilot with you guys in the broader community. So with that, the meeting is adjourned. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see everyone in 3 weeks.